Today, I have the pleasure to present Michael Miller, who was born in a small village in New Jersey, similar to Fayetteville, New York. Through small town life, he learned to respect people regardless of their backgrounds and to appreciate the gifts each person brings to the world. He developed a love of research during his schooling at Tufts University, where he got a bachelor's, City College of New York, where he received a master's, and at Mount Sinai, where he received a PhD. And he furthered that love of research during his academic career, in which he taught at Tulane, Rutgers, University of Iowa, and SUNY. He applied these skills when he wrote his debut novel, High Bridge, Matilda and Grover Battle Learned Ignorance. With that, I present Michael Miller.
When I wanted to come and I reached out to Fred about the idea of talking about these two people that I believe that most people aren't really aware of. You've probably heard of Matilda, Joslyn, Gage, maybe. And Grover Cleveland,
Yeah.
probably heard of, but probably don't know a whole lot about. I'm just projecting here. But I think they both are fascinating people, and really we can learn still things from them. They have an interesting common history and disparate history, which I'll try and bring up. So now I can't go forward here. Okay, hold on. There we go. So Gloria Steinem described Matilda Joslyn Gage when she first heard about her in the 1980s, that she was the woman who was ahead of the women who were ahead of their time. That's pretty high praise from somebody who went through what I'll call the second women's movement in the 60s and 70s. And Joseph Pulitzer made the comment about Grover Cleveland, repeating himself 4 times, he's an honest man. And that was in the time of Tammany Hall. So that came as high praise from a yellow journalist, Joseph Pulitzer. Okay. Went the wrong way. I'll get this all squared away eventually. So the way to really understand what these two people brought to our world and to our country is to try and go back to the 1800s and put our heads there, because that's the world that they were living in. And for the sake of argument, and I'm assuming that people here like to argue, I'll say the 1800s were the most progressive period.
Michael, hold the mic up to your mouth.
The most progressive period in the history of the world. So what did we get in the 1800s? We got massive changes that we all take for granted right now, having to do with things like travel. Think about how boats used to go across the ocean, Christopher Columbus, Vasco da Gama, whoever you want. They had to wait for the vagaries of the weather to carry them with the wind. But during the 1800s, multiple ways were generated to be able to power boats, steam being the most common one. And because of that, you didn't have to wait, and you could actually make a schedule for when you'd go leave from Plymouth, England, and you'd get to Boston or whatever. Same thing was true for on the road. Cars were invented in the 1800s. We take them for granted. But electric cars were among the first cars that were generated. Internal combustion vehicles. Steam was also used. All that happened in the 1800s. So now, if you wanted to mail something, you could mail something and you would know that it would get there in a certain period of time. You didn't have to wait for the Pony Express to exhaust horses and people and take a week or 2 weeks to go from point A to point B. The electric light bulb and electricity was not just discovered, but it just revolutionized the whole day. night became day. You could have factories running for longer periods of time. You could study, you could write, you could do anything you wanted to in the evening, right?
Anything.
Well-
Michael, could you also, another request of people online, could you
Stay in one place. Boy, they're really, oh, man. Okay. All right. I know who the taskmaster is. It's Zoom. Okay. No, it's okay. I will do my best.
Thank you.
So the other part is that leisure, documentation, and communication were all facilitated in the 1800s. Think about it. There were no cameras before the 1800s. There was no way, except for a painter, to paint George Washington or whatever, to be able to have us know what somebody looked like. The first recordings on a phonograph in the 1800s. So now we know what people sounded like back then. All of these things made it possible for us to document and have a record. The telegraph was created. The telephone was created in the 1800s. So now communication didn't have to wait for you to go from one place to another or a mail to go a long distance. You could do it in 10 seconds and have a telegraph go from one place to another. Amazing changes that we just take for granted. The computer's done a bunch, but nothing compared to the life-changing things that happened. All right. In addition to that, I'm going to argue that one of the other major advances was something that everybody here loves, the Erie Canal. The Erie Canal was probably what was considered the eighth wonder of the world. So what did it do? Well, let me give you some of a sense of that. Aside from the song that everybody knows and learned when they were a little kid, the Erie Canal joined essentially Troy with the Great Lakes. Now, why is that important? Well, it was created by DeWitt Clinton shortly after the Louisiana Purchase. So there was this mass of land way out there people had no real access to unless they wanted to basically give up half a year or a year of their life to get there. And being able to carry the things to get out there was really tough. So what DeWitt Clinton wanted to do, much to the derision of the Assembly, which just passed this bill to try and allow you to be able to decide when you're going to die or not. In the time, they were not really up and happy about the idea of putting in a lot of money to build a canal. And they derided DeWitt Clinton, the canal as Clinton's folly or DeWitt's ditch. But it made massive changes, not just for New York, but for the country and I would argue for the world. So it was built over an 8-year period from 1817 until 1825. And it went right across the whole state. New York, as you well know, is not flat. And there were a lot of things that had to be done engineering-wise to make it possible. But the reason that it became so powerful is because DeWitt Clinton and the legislature had only themselves to argue with. They didn't have to negotiate with any other states. The entire canal was in the state. So they could do what they wanted without having to talk to the federal government and getting any assistance. It made it possible for them to do it. And what it did was it connected these Great Lakes and everything out there, all the bounty beaver pelts, wood, all sorts of things that were coming out of wheat, whatever you want from the Great Lake states, and being able to bring them to port in New York City and then going to the world or going to the rest of the country. As a result of that, what did we get? Well, we got Alexander Hamilton's dream. New York City became the city he wanted it and thought it should be. He gave up the power base of New York City being the center, the capital of the country, in exchange for this hope that New York would be the economic base for the country. The Erie Canal did that. Everything that came from the West for a period of time had to go through New York City, or vice versa. Anything going to the West had to go through New York City to go up the Hudson, across the canal, and into the Great Lakes. What else happened? Chicago, Toledo, Ohio, Cleveland, Detroit, all of these grew because of the Erie Canal and making the Great Lakes what they were, important transportation venues. All right. But in addition to moving cargo and people, products, it also was the mechanism for the movement of ideas.
Yes.
And that's a currency that's super important. We all base our lives on ideas and facts, or at least we like to think so. Have you ever heard of the term the burned over district? Okay, the burned over district is essentially upstate New York. And we can have arguments and have lots of fun of what upstate New York really means. Is it anywhere above Yonkers or whatever? But anyhow, the main part of New York, the geographical New York, upstate New York. And it was called the burned over district by a guy named Charles Finney, who started out as a lawyer and then saw the light and became an evangelist. And he decided to go out into the world and try and convert people. That's what an evangelist does, right? And when he didn't have any more kindling left to convert people, it was described that there was no more fires that could be burned. It was burned over. So it was called the burned over district because everybody who was going to be able to be converted was. Okay. What came out of this? Well, from this area, the Shakers. But there was the Oneida community, Mormons, Millerites who became the Adventists. A whole host of different religions were generated in upstate New York, which was the center of activity for the country. Right in the middle of this is the Erie Canal. So let me try and give you a little more. So here's the burned over district for the western part of the state. Well, no, I'm not getting animations. It had the whole state here. It's okay. On the right side is a blow up of the part that I'm going to be focusing on, where Fayetteville is in the middle of Onondaga County, where Syracuse is the county seat. But these red lines are not the Erie Canal, because the Erie Canal's not that extensive. That's the Underground Railroad. So along with the idea or the movement of religions that are being born and being moved to other parts of the country, there's also New York has got this fervor of great deal of activity going on where enslaved blacks are trying to find freedom, and they're going by the Underground Railroad. And New York, upstate New York, is a center for that, to get up to Canada where they would be really free. Okay. In addition to all of this mix of religion, there's this almost like a counter response to that, which were the free thinkers. Free thinkers kind of overlap with the more, get kind of lost in words sometimes, but I'll call it liberal religions, ones that are more open than the more doctrinaire, like Catholicism. And free thinking also originated in upstate New York. And I bring up free thinking because free thinking is humanism. Okay. Free thinking began largely with a guy named George Houston in a small community in Haverstraw, New York, right on the Hudson River. And he moved to a place or had a bunch of disciples who started to set up little places across the state. And one of them was a guy named John Collins, who wanted to establish a community based on the principles of free thinking. And that was in Skaneateles Lake. If anybody knows where Skaneateles Lake is, it's arguably one of the Finger Lakes, the smallest one, just west of Syracuse. So he set up a Fourier community there and attracted people from all over the country, or at least the Northeast. And one of those people was a guy named Hezekiah Joslyn, who lived in Cicero, New York, and he was a physician. He was politically active. He actually started something called the Free Labor Party. I can't remember exactly. Hopefully I have a note about it here. The Liberty Party, excuse me, Liberty Party he established. And this is a picture of him. And he was a very well respected and regarded man in the Cicero area, which is just north of Syracuse. He also had an underground railroad station in his home, and this is a picture of his home, which does not exist any longer. It's on Brewerton Road, which goes directly from Syracuse and goes due north toward snow country, although I guess Cicero is also part of snow country. And this is a very well-to-do home for somebody in that period of time. If you look a little closely, you may actually see that there's a woman standing in front of it over there on the left. And I believe that's his wife, Helen. We don't know for sure, but that may be the only picture we have of Helen. So Helen and Hezekiah had two children. I'm sorry, one child. I'm jumping here. One child, and that was Matilda Joslyn. They poured everything of their being into her. They schooled her in everything: Latin, Greek, sciences, maths, philosophy, and brought her up with the expectation that she was going to go to medical school and she would be the first woman physician in the country. That didn't happen because the rest of the country, particularly Geneva Medical School, which is where Hobart College is, was not ready for that. And they rejected her just because she was a woman, not because she wasn't capable. But Matilda Joslyn Gage met a man named Henry Hill Gage. Eventually they got married and they had 5 children. And this is the genealogy of those two people. And I don't know, I don't know if the people in Zoom land can see the cursor, but here's Hezekiah. And over here is Helen. And those are the people that had one child. And that is Matilda Joslyn Gage right there.
So the cursor does show in Zoom.
Does that work?
Yes.
Good. Okay. All right. So we'll talk more about the genealogy in a little bit. So Matilda was this dynamo of a person, even at a young age of 14, 15 years old. She eventually went beyond what her parents could teach her, and she went to the Clinton Liberal Institute right next to where present-day Hamilton College is. She went there for a year. Eventually, Matilda and Henry got married and moved to Fayetteville. And Fayetteville, for anybody who doesn't know, is about 5 miles due east of Syracuse. And there is a historical sign on the road. You can see a picture of that in the top left, which just says that Matilda Joslyn Gage lived here. And that, when I moved to the area, I didn't know anything about her, so I was intrigued, but not enough to do much about it. Anyhow, it points to this house, which this is a picture from the 1800s of the house soon after it was built, It's a rather august kind of neoclassical two-story building. So Matilda lived there with Henry from 1854 until her death in 1898. Good chunk of time. During her time after she was rejected from medical school and trying to figure out what she was going to do in her life, she was starting to get interested in what she was able to do or what she wasn't able to do. And she was aware of the first women's suffrage convention in Seneca Falls in 1848. She was not yet living in Fayetteville at that time. She was somewhere else in Manlius, but we don't really know where she was at that time. But that was a very, very notable event, that convention. That's when a lot of women, and there were a bunch of men who were also attending, including Frederick Douglass and Gerrit Smith and a few others, came up with a clear list of things they expected the federal government to do for women. It was called the Declaration of Sentiments. And there's a whole list of them here. And I've highlighted a few of them in bold. I'll read a couple of them. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but basically the idea is that just by the rights imbued by the Creator, that women and men are equal. So that women is man's equal was intended to be so by the Creator. The highest good of the race demands that she should be recognized as such. That inasmuch as a man, while claiming himself intellectual superiority, does accord to women moral superiority, it is preeminently his duty to encourage her to speak and teach, as she has an opportunity in all religious assemblies. And it goes on and on. They're really quite powerful set of declarations. That came out in 1848. There were two other conventions that followed it, one in Worcester, Massachusetts, and then there was one in 1852 in Syracuse. That was Matilda's coming out party, so to speak. She attended that one, and it was also the first meeting that was attended by Susan B. Anthony, interestingly. Susan B. Anthony being a little bit older than Matilda. Matilda at this point already had 2 of her 5 children, which is part of why she wasn't able to go to the other conventions. She just didn't have the opportunity. And this was the one where the bloomers were introduced to the world. Lucy Stone, who was one of the leaders of the women's movement at the time, more a bloomer at the event. But there was a lot more substance, although having clothes that allowed you to do things instead of having to wear these long full-length dresses is not a small thing. So it was an event of great import. And this is where Matilda actually was encouraged to come up and give a speech. She didn't know anybody before she got there. She happened to have a speech at her disposal, and Lucretia Mott, who was the president of this convention, asked her to give the speech, and she did. She gave the speech, and it was a spellbinding one. In a different mode here. So what did Matilda Joslyn Gage preach, if preach is the right word? She believed in universal rights. That's not something that everybody of that day believed in. I'll call universal rights the rights for Blacks, Indigenous people, and women. The rights of everybody should be the same. So just an example, there are many, many examples to go to all of these different things. So as far as her support for Blacks, she had an Underground Railroad station in her home in Fayetteville, as she had in her childhood home. And when the fugitive slave law came out in 1850 and was declared by Congress, which fugitive slave law was designed that if there was a Black that couldn't prove that he or she was free, they could immediately be arrested or were demanded to be arrested by anybody and returned to somebody who would carry them back to the South. Kind of like today. Yeah. Yeah. It was a terrible law, but she risked going to jail and she came out against it very publicly. As far as Indigenous people, she is one of few people back in that time who was actually so enamored of the matriarchal arrangement in the Sixth Nation of the Haudenosaunee that she became an honorary member toward the end of her life, where the Mohawk actually inducted her into the nation and gave her a name. And then as far as her support for women, which we go on and on about, just one example here is that Susan B. Anthony illegally voted in the election of Horace Greeley and Ulysses S. Grant in 1872, and no man would take the case when she got arrested. Matilda represented her in court. All right. So Matilda was one of what was called the triumvirate of women during the women's movement. The triumvirate was Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Matilda Joslyn Gage. We know Susan B. Anthony quite well. She was very good at self-promotion. And she did the exact what she needed to do to be self-promotion. You push the people down who are close to you. And she basically tried to bury Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Matilda Joslyn Gage from history. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton came back to our consciousness in the 60s, and Matilda has, over the last maybe 20 years or so, started to come back into consciousness. Together, though, while they were working together, they were a powerhouse, and they wrote a set of volumes, which I have a picture of in the top left, The History of Women's Suffrage. There are, I believe, 6 volumes in total. Matilda was only involved in the generation of the first 3. And here are some quotes, in case I haven't given you enough of a sense of how fantastic a person she was. Enforced motherhood is a crime against the body of the mother and the soul of the child. My blood always boils at the advice from a man in regard to a family that at least should be in the province of women alone, to say when and how often she chooses to go down into the valley of the shadow of death to give the world another child should be hers alone to say. Unless the American people rouse to instant action, she shall soon find our government turned into a monarchy, church and state united, and the people no better than serfs. And she wrote that in her last major piece of writing called Woman, Church, and State, where she railed against the patriarchy that was inherent in the structure of the church. And she had no patience for that at all. She actually, I don't know if she stopped calling herself a Christian toward the end of her life, but she called herself a theosophist. She just moved away from organized religion. The last quote I have here, women should unite, or second to last, women should unite upon a platform of opposition to the teaching and the aim of ever so most unscrupulous enemy of freedom, the church.
Yeah.
So she was a very spiritual person, don't get me wrong, but the idea of a formal framework, a structure, was anathema to her. and this is what she's best known for as far as quotes. There is a word sweeter than mother, home, or heaven. That word is liberty. And that's on her, that's an epitaph on her gravestone, which is in Fayetteville Cemetery. All right. So whoop, go back. There we go. Too bad. There we go. Well, all right. Well, come on. I'm not getting my controls here. It's all me. It isn't like that middle one. Come on, just one slide. Thank you. There we go. All right, so I said I would get back to the genealogy. Matilda and Henry had 5 children. The last one, who was much younger than the other 4, the earlier 4, you want to call her oops, whatever you want to call her. Anyhow, Maud was the last one who was born, and she married somebody named L. Frank Baum. You know who L. Frank? The Wizard of Oz. He wrote The Wizard of Oz. He was actually a bit of a nebbish. He just, anything he tried to do, he failed at. Until he wrote a book called Father Goose. And that book got some success and got traction in the world. And from that, he put the energy in and then said, okay, I'll write another book, and this is it. So he wrote The Wizard of Oz. All right. And this picture on the right shows 2 people. One you may know. The one on the left of that picture is Judy Garland, who played in the movie. And the person on the right is Maud, who is reading from the original version of her husband's book, The Wizard of Oz, to Judy. Okay, so why is this important? Well, L. Frank Baum was totally enamored by his mother-in-law. And she funneled so much of what she believed in into him. So when you think about The Wizard of Oz, it's one of the first books, non-romantic books, the first book where there is a strong female character. Dorothy, right? Dorothy is curious, she's smart, she's courageous, she has heart, she has a brain, all of those things. She is all of that. And that is the feminist of Matilda in Frank. In kind, Frank put her into the story. You see this? The still here. Go, who are the characters here? Here, from left to right. Left is Dorothy.
Auntie M, Uncle Henry.
Auntie M, Uncle Henry. M, Henry. Matilda, Henry. There they are. They've been there all the time. Matilda Joslyn Gage and her husband Henry Hill Gage. So whether we know it or not, we've known about Matilda. All right. Let me talk about the other major person who came out of Fayetteville, or called Fayetteville home, and that's Grover Cleveland. Now, I'm going to get my cursor out here again. You can see right here, I'm circling around some kind of a light bluish cyan thing. That's where the Gage house is. And not very far away, there was another historical sign that said Grover Cleveland grew up here. And he grew up in a house down the street and to the left, and the second one on the left. Anyhow, it's this house that's shown here. And that is the parsonage for what used to be the Presbyterian Church, which is now there were a number of unifications and changes in the church, but the United Church of Fayetteville is what used to be the Presbyterian Church. Now remember, keep in mind that earlier on, I talked about all the different religions that were going on in the burned over district. Well, the Presbyterian Church wanted to keep its beachhead somewhere in upstate New York. They didn't want to relinquish all of its control of whatever body of people that were believers in the Presbyterian philosophy. They wanted to make sure that they still had a toehold in what's going on. So one of the churches that they had was here in Fayetteville, which was established in the early 1840s. And one of the people who became a minister, actually the second minister at that church, was Reverend Richard Thaley Cleveland, Grover Cleveland's father. And he moved along with his wife, Ann Neal, to Fayetteville when Grover was 4 years old. And Grover lived there from 4 until about 14, 15. So he considered Fayetteville his home. And he lived in this little house, which was for sale last year if you wanted to buy it. And he lived there with his other siblings, 7 others. At that time, ultimately, there were 9 children in the Cleveland family. Grover was right in the middle. So here's the list of the children from Anna all the way down to Rose. And you can see Grover right there smack in the middle. Grover Cleveland was very much affected by his father and the austereness of the Presbyterian philosophy. But he also liked to have a lot of fun, which is not part of the Presbyterian philosophy. And he went out fishing. He would go play baseball. He would do all sorts of things. He was a real prankster too. He was not very devoted to his studies, but he did okay. And eventually, he had to get a job. He felt that he had to get out of Fayetteville. His brother had already taken a job at the New York School for the Blind in New York City, not too far from where Penn Station is. And Grover went down there, worked for a year, couldn't take it anymore. Just didn't work for him being a teacher. When came back to Fayetteville for another couple of years, and then he said, "I've got to go." And where's he going to go? Cleveland, Ohio. Oh, Cleveland, Ohio. Thank you. His intention was to go to Cleveland. Now, you may ask, was Cleveland named after him or somebody? It was named after an ancestor, a distant ancestor. But he never made it to Cleveland. He got to Buffalo, where it had some family and some friends, and he was taken in, and eventually he became an apprentice lawyer, became a lawyer through that process, and then became the sheriff of Buffalo. To give you a sense of how much intestinal rectitude and strength that he had as a person, while he was sheriff, there were at least 2 people who were not indicted, convicted of capital crimes. And they were to be hanged. Grover Cleveland, who was the sheriff, said, okay, he had the right to be able to say, okay, somebody else go witness this and make sure that it's all done up to Hoyle. But he said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm the sheriff. It's my responsibility to do this. People have spoken. I will be the witness and make sure that everything is done properly. And he did. So after that, he went back to being a lawyer, and then he became the mayor of Buffalo. He was mayor for 1 year, and then he was already identified as being somebody who was noteworthy, and he became the governor immediately after.
Okay.
And then Another 2 years later, he was elected as the president of the United States. So he went from being mayor of Buffalo, which was a big city. It was the second biggest city in New York, from mayor of Buffalo to being president of the United States in 3 years.
How old he was?
At that, when he became president the first time, he was about 45.
Oh,
Don't hold me to that number, but somewhere in that ballpark. So it was pretty meteoric, and goes back to the comment that Pulitzer said. They really needed somebody who was honest and would be a good arbiter for the people, on behalf of the people. So let me give you a few quotes for some accomplishments. He signed the Interstate Commerce Act. Now, we take that for granted because we go on an interstate highway and we go from one state to another without even blinking an eye. But this was a new concept. And I believe that this is the outcoming or outgrowth of his experience living near the Erie Canal. The Erie Canal sewed the country together. And this is a later iteration of that by getting transportation to go seamlessly from one state to another. All right. He fought the robber barons. Now, he didn't have the cred or the success that we attribute to Teddy Roosevelt for trust busting, but he's the one who set it all up for Teddy Roosevelt to become the success that he became. He started the process. He got tagged by Mark Twain, who loved to make little political barbs by calling it the Gilded Age, and having him being the president during that time. But it really, he did everything he could, given what he believed the government was empowered to do, given that time. And part of that was he vetoed lots of legislation. He, other than Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he vetoed more legislation than any other president. Now, why did he do? Sure. No, it's okay. It's just where I was going. So why did he do it? For a few reasons. One, he believed that there shouldn't be political patronage. People shouldn't be appointed to a position because they had been there or because they had done something that made a political person, got that person into office. He believed that people should be there because they'll do the right job. He felt that people who were in the Civil War deserve pensions, or their spouses or children deserve pensions, but that people who were trying to bilk the system and get pensions that they weren't entitled to should not. So he vetoed a lot of laws. He read every bill that came through Congress from beginning to end. He would be up 2, 3, 4 in the morning routinely. He was known for that kind of a work ethic. So he may not have been the brightest, but he was a hard worker and he was honest.
Yeah.
Right. He established a Department of Labor for people's rights, for workers' rights. He probably, what I think is the most endearing one, is that he stood up for the Republic of Hawaii. Hawaii was an empire at the time, a separate entity, sovereignty all to itself in the 1870s. But it was eyed by many nations who wanted to take it over, annex it, and use it as their, for whatever reason that they wanted. Russia, Germany, no, it wasn't Germany, Denmark, some other countries wanted to take it over. And he kept us from getting involved in a war over it, much to his credit. And he also kept Hawaii independent. So he navigated the diplomatic lines to be able to make that possible. And my understanding is that to this day, on his on his birthday, which is March 24th, the state of Hawaii sends a representative to the gravesite, and there's always a celebration for every president on his or her, on his birthday, and they send a representative because it's out of respect and deference to what he did for them. All right. So, what did he say? I'll give you a few quotes. A government for the people must depend for its success on the intelligence, the morality, and the justice and the interest of the people themselves. He believed in the people. You probably would call him a libertarian in current parlance. He was a Democrat. He was the only Democrat to be elected between Lincoln and Woodrow Wilson. More to his credit that he was able to navigate that. I believe that he who thinks it brave and manly to outgrow his care and devotion for his mother is fit for treason, stratagems, and spoils, and should not be trusted. Now, I built them all up. And now here we go. Sensible and responsible women do not want the vote. The relative positions to be assumed by man and women in the working out of our civilization were assigned long ago by an intelligence higher than ours. Well, that's his religion coming through, his father's religion coming through. And yeah, he was not in favor of it. Someday I will be better remembered. Well, that line comes from his second presidency. And his second presidency was not as successful as his first presidency, because about 2 months before he became president, in January of 1893, the worst depression the United States had ever had happened, the Panic of 1893. And it was there for about 3 years before it finally resolved. And that was most of his presidency. So it was not met with a lot of success. And he basically, believing in the individual person, he was kind of like Herbert Hoover, believed that you could pick yourself up by your bootstraps and figure it out. Clearly, we know now in retrospect that that's not the way you deal with a depression. But, all right. So here's his tombstone. And if you look closely at it, you may not be able to read it. I'm just going to tell you, it is very simple. It only has his name, his birth dates, and his death dates. Doesn't say he's president. Didn't say he was a governor. Didn't say he was a mayor, anything. He was a very humble man. He did what he was supposed to do. He did what people asked him to do. It wasn't out of ego. He did it because people put him forward to do it. And his last words were apparently, "I have tried so hard to do right." He was a very human person. So some things about him. Now, these would have come through with animations, but so some of them are blocked by other things that layered in here. But in the top left image, there's a picture of him in all dudded up in a tuxedo, and his wife, Frances Folsom, who he married in the White House, which was then called the Executive Mansion, is the only president ever to get married as the president. He also had a child who was very well known and regarded, Ruth. That was a child that was born between the two presidencies, because he was the first president to win discontinuous presidencies. And that was Ruth. And because she just a demonstration of the regard that the country had for her, there was a candy bar named after her, Baby Ruth, not named after a baseball player who will go nameless.
So you're not a Red Sox fan or Yankees fan?
Yes. But I will say that he is one of only 3 presidents to have won the popular vote 3 times in a row. Do you know who the others are? FDR is one. He won it 4 times in a row, right? Okay. The other one's a little more removed, and that's Andrew Jackson. The first one he won by popular vote. Nobody won the Electoral College that year. And the person who actually became president, John Quincy Adams, won it because it went to the House of Representatives. But that just shows the high regard that he won 3 times in a row. Can't say that about our current president. All right. Number of places have been named after him. Or Cleveland Park, which is part of Washington, D.C., is named after him. There are places like in Mississippi that are named after him. And he was one of the few presidents that made that his puss is on a bill. And you can see it on the $1,000 bill, not minted anymore, if minting paper is the right word, not made anymore. So, but he has faded in his esteem over time. I think it's largely that he didn't have any wars to his credit, and that's usually what brings somebody up in estimation. But comparison between the two of them, I'm going to try and give you a sense of what Fayetteville did. Fayetteville served as an incubator for both the ideas that both of these people eventually used as their way of moving around the world. Matilda Joslyn Gage was a free thinker. That came from her father when she lived in Cicero and was fed during her time in Fayetteville. Grover Cleveland was a devout Presbyterian his whole life. So one town gave rise to people who have vastly different ideas. They were both leaders, one for the women's movement and one in government. Now, you may ask, did they ever meet each other? And the answer is yes, they did meet each other. Grover Cleveland, being the fair-minded person that he was, invited the leaders of the women's suffrage movement to come to the executive mansion, even though he didn't agree with what they were saying. He invited all of them to come to the mansion and have a banquet.
Oh.
And Matilda was certainly one of those who was there. And I can't believe that when they shook hands or whatever, that they didn't have a conversation about Fayetteville. It's just hard to believe, but there's no documentation for it. I would say that they were both radical in their own way too. Matilda Joslyn Gage, being the universal rights person that she was radical, and that's why she and Susan B. Anthony fell out. Susan B. Anthony thought only women's vote is what we go for. We don't go for abortion rights. We don't go for divorce rights. We don't go for economic rights. We go for just the vote, and that's it. And she jumped out of the National Women's Suffrage Association and jumped into the American Women's Suffrage Association, which was in cahoots with the religious movement, with the temperance movement, and just used them as her base for purposes of getting the vote. So she threw aside all of her other contacts. Whether she was right or whether she was wrong, that's what happened. They both of them believed in personal rights, a person's rights in different ways, but they believed that an individual had rights as an American citizen. So I have a lot of respect for both of them. I think they're both fascinating people, and I think we're coming around, and we're still working through the issues that they were dealing with 150 years ago. So the end of Matilda Joslyn Gage, I could take off the happy birthday part, the end of her talk when she gave her speech at the women's suffrage movement in Syracuse was, "Onward, let truth prevail." So I encourage you to learn more about them. I wrote a book where the two of them are the main characters, and I have copies of it here if you're interested. But I do your research, learn more about them. I think you'll you'll be amazed. So I open it up to questions.
Thank you very much. So I got a question for you, totally unrelated a little bit.
Unrelated, go ahead.
Well, so a topic you brought up, you talked about Grover Cleveland was encouraged pensions for veterans. My question is, was that veterans for both sides of the conflict or just one side of the conflict?
Either side.
Okay, so
If they were in the war and there had been laws passed by the Reconstructionist Congress, those should be honored and they should get what they deserved.
okay, so regardless of which side.
That's right.
Okay. I had another question out here.
Yes.
The president also buried in Fayetteville?
No, he isn't buried in Princeton.
Oh,
After his second presidency, he wasn't sure what he was going to do, but he basically decided just to move to Princeton, but with the encouragement of some friends that he had made during his presidency. Eventually, he became a trustee of the university, and he lived there for the rest of his life. So when did he die? 1907, I think he died. So it was the last 15-ish years. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I'm just curious about,
Children, and you mentioned Maud, the daughter married.
So we're talking about Matilda, Joslyn, Gage's children. Yes.
so did she do anything other than that? I mean,
Did any children become notable, I guess?
yes, like,
Question.
Notable as in, so the question, I should have repeated the question since people can't necessarily hear. The question is, did any of the other four children other than Maud, did any of the other children become something?
I mean, she married someone, but that's not really notable in your own right. So did she do anything
I don't
else?
think that L. Frank Baum would have been or done what he did without having Maud as his wife. Maud was very much cut in the same cloth as Matilda, being stern, lovingly stern. So I think that without that, he would have just been the loser that he was before that, where he was an actor, he didn't do very well. He started a general store, it didn't work. He moved to North Dakota and made something called a bazaar, Bazaar, to sell things that people in North Dakota didn't need. They needed things to help them live and to till the ground or whatever. He was just tone deaf to what was appropriate. Without her, it wouldn't have happened. So I don't just say that that's like saying that Michelle Obama was not important to Barack Obama and helping him become who he became. Would he?
All right, and very successful.
You can come up with all sorts of other things. I'm just saying that just because you're married doesn't mean that you weren't part of the equation that made that person important. So the other four children, Henry, when I wrote my book, I didn't know this was true, but Henry became an apprentice and became a lawyer. I put that into my book not knowing that was the fact, that was accurate. And I think two of his sons also became lawyers after the fact. So they were locally important for the communities that they lived in. And I don't know enough about the other girls to be able to answer the question. But nobody became a member of Congress. Nobody that I'm aware of became a writer or anything, which Matilda clearly was a very accomplished writer. So I would say they were just important for their communities and filtered into the goings on in their communities. Yeah. Now, would Maud have been successful if she had married in that same way, if she had married Frank? I don't know. those are the what ifs that you can't ever answer those kind of questions. But when Frank died relatively young, like in the 1910s, and she lived until the 1940s, and she became a player in Hollywood.
That's what, yeah.
And why? Well, there were a number of iterations of the Wizard of Oz. Wizard of Oz was kind of like the Harry Potter of its time. There were, how many are there? 11 Oz books, and the Wonderful Wizard of Oz is just the first one. They
You
were
still see it today on Broadway. The
Wiz.
movie Wicked.
Yeah, that was written by somebody else,
But it's the same.
but it's the same ethos. Yes, and yeah, and then there's the Wiz, the movie, which was different. But so there have been probably 5 different iterations of the original story in play or musical form. So she was involved in making sure that people did it right. Yes.
So, I'm a little
Confused.
Were Robert Cleveland and
And
Matilda Johnson Gage in Fayetteville at the same time ever? No.
I can't give a straight answer to that, much as I would love to. Grover Cleveland was there from until probably 1852 or 3. The house that I showed you, the Gage house, was built in 1854. They were in Manlius of unknown, I don't know exactly where, nobody in any of correspondence or anything wrote down the address. It was just Manlius. Fayetteville is part of the town of Manlius, I should say that. And the best I can say is they may have seen each other on the street. There's a 9-year difference between the two of them, 10-year difference. And he may have just been an urchin that was just running along the street while she was walking around with pushing a baby pram. I have no idea whether they actually met, but the book that I wrote imagined that they did meet and how the interaction would have happened. So 1898, I'm sorry, 1888, they did meet. That much I can say. They did meet,
I don't know what was said.
but we don't know what was said,
Okay.
even though there was the ability to record things at the time.
It was a big machine.
It was a very big machine.
I don't see any questions from people online. I want to thank you, Michael, for a very interesting presentation.
Thank you.
And I didn't realize you bring your book to sell.
Okay,
Thank you much, all.
Thank you.
click this off.
Yes.
Off.